Well, folks, in today's video, we're going to be working on my grandmother's 1951 Rivarossi Hiawatha. It's been a project over the last 7 or so years, and it's actually what founded this channel all the way back in 2016. Anyways, in that time, I have been successful at getting it riding the rails once again, but it's never truly been complete, all because of this one bearing cap, which has been missing ever since I got it. So the goal today is going to be to install a new pair of drivers, which will improve this locomotive a great deal, not just cosmetically, but also mechanically, because right now it's only a two-wheel drive locomotive, which obviously means it doesn't have very much pulling capacity. Now, luckily I was able to import some reproduction drivers for this locomotive from Italy. It's this dealer called Rivarossi, and they make reproduction parts which should either meet or exceed the original parts specifications, and we'll have a quick look at these. They're certainly not cheap, but they're quite nice looking. They actually threw a thicker gear on here, so this should last longer than the original, and I mean, these really just look terrific. So now we'll work on disassembling this locomotive and making our way down to the bottom of the chassis here. It's one of the few Rivarossi locomotives where the frame is actually closed in here, so we'll have to remove the brushes to take it out. With the drive all out, we'll start to remove some of these caps here. I'm certainly not going to be throwing these wheel sets away, but just look at the difference between the thickness of both gear sets. You can see, this one's got quite a bit more meat on it, which means this will hopefully last a whole lot longer. Before we go putting anything back together, I'm just going to quickly clean up all these parts with a little bit of rubbing alcohol here. Alright, well, with the chassis all tidied up, I think we'll throw in the new sets of wheels here. Now the wheel sets come pre-quartered, so I don't think we need to make any adjustments there. This might take a bit of breaking in. These do feel ever so slightly stiff. We'll see if they just kind of self-clearance a little bit as they turn around. If not, I can reopen this again at some point, but I think these parts need to break in just because the original parts would have worn into the chassis a certain way. And then we'll just throw the grease bath back on there. This is the only part of this design which I have a bit of trouble with, which is that you need to tighten this down enough to hold this cap on here and keep the wheels in place. But if you over tighten it, these wheels won't turn properly, so you kind of just need to find that right balance. But I think this is all looking pretty good. It's so surreal to actually see drivers on this thing, because the entire time I've had it, it never had these parts. They were broken off. It had them on one side, but I had to remove them because you need both drivers for the locomotive to work, obviously. A lot of people ask me if Rivarossi locomotives are good quality, and my answer to that is absolutely. They were definitely well made. They can be a little bit finicky. I find you have to, sometimes play around with them a little bit just to get them to run properly, but there was very good craftsmanship put into them. When they were making these things out in Italy, they really took their time with the parts, and everything was made quite carefully, and even today, that still definitely shows. Now we're also going to be installing a new worm gear on this locomotive, and you can see the teeth are a little bit thicker on this one, and I think that's to accommodate for the wider teeth also on the gear. So again, these parts should last longer. But just as an example of, again, how well they were making these locomotives, these are actually packed with ball bearings, and I'm not going to pull this out too far because I don't want them to all fall out, but you can kind of see them in there, and you just don't see that even on modern locomotives. I mean, it's kind of overly engineered, but Rivarossi motors, which also used this design, are still running 70 years later, so they were doing something right, that's for sure. Now really just to complete the rebuild, I got some genuine Rivarossi grease, and I'm just going to quickly pack the new worm gear. This stuff is nice and tacky, so it should protect all these metal parts very well. On plastic parts I find you can get away with using oil or a thin grease, but when you're working with these metal parts, you really just do not want to mess around with them because they'll strip out very quickly if they don't have enough oil. I'll rotate this over and make sure everything gets a even coating. Amazing, as I turn that over, I can already feel the grease starting to work its way through there, and everything is already starting to seat a little bit, so very happy with how this is all coming along here. Also going to redo some of this work I did a few years ago. This is really not so good here, so get some heat shrink on there at a minimum. Yeah, I already like how that looks a lot more. Alright, well, I'm very happy with how that's all looking now, so I think we'll throw this plate back over there. So unfortunately, I'm missing 2 of the screws here, and this is not a huge deal, but I would prefer to have all 4. Now, I wasn't able to find any replacements, but I did find these bolts, which are also made by Rivarossi, and they're about the same length, and they use the same size threads. So I think I'm going to throw a couple of those in there, and it will certainly be better than nothing. It's definitely not going to hurt anything, which is what really matters. Alright, well, it's now the next day. I had to do quite a bit of work off camera last night because after I put these 2 bolts in, this all stopped turning as well. So I was pretty confused. I thought maybe I'd made a bit of a mistake not adding any clearance here. So I did some adjustments to the wheels. I sanded some things down, and I got the wheels turning perfectly, put this back on, and the problem was still there. So I was really confused. I was sure that that was the issue. But as it turned out, the worm gear was actually making contact with this plate up here. So I had to add these 2 spacers just to give it a tiny bit of clearance, and you can see right now it pretty much turns effortlessly, which is exactly what you want. So it's possible in the future I might have to make some adjustments to the metal. I just don't want to push this down too far because there's only so much space you want between the gear and the worm drive. So I don't know, you have to be kind of careful with those adjustments, but it's working well now, so we'll focus on some other areas like the motor and the rest of the electrical system, and hopefully get this locomotive running nicely. Now, as for getting the motor mounted up, I did buy these brand new bolts for it. They're all blacked out, so they should match the chassis, and I think will look quite nice. So we'll get those in place. Now I think we'll go ahead and throw the weight back on. Just going to quickly throw the brushes in for a test just before I pack this thing into its shell. Does not seem to want to run. Let's try full reverse here. It appears that these 2 bolts up here are going through that plate a little too far, and they're actually making contact with the worm gear, so I think eventually I am going to have to make some adjustments down there, but for now I'll probably just add a couple of washers on top of here, and then we won't have to mess around with that chassis. Okay, that's turning a whole lot better. It's still a little bit slow, but I mean, these are all brand new parts and they all need to break in. It's kind of like having a party with a bunch of new people. Everybody just needs to get to know each other a little bit better for things to work. It's going to be interesting trying to get these bolts around those screws. Knew that was going to happen. It looks so nice seeing this thing with genuine parts back in here. I really hope this doesn't cause issues though. I mean, these rods are really close to the shell, so I don't know if that's supposed to be that way, but we'll run it either way. Now, I'm going to be making some performance upgrades to this locomotive. I was recently watching another channel called Darth Santa Fe, a great channel by the way, and he was talking about how Rivarossi locomotives, you know, the majority of the motors had both a copper and a carbon brush, and what he was explaining is that the idea is the carbon brush kind of lubricates the motor, the copper brush kind of cleans it. It's not a bad idea in concept, but these arc a lot, so the performance upgrade is just adding 2 carbon brushes. Now this does mean that the commutator might need to be cleaned a bit more often, but it should put a lot less wear on it, which is quite important when you're dealing with a motor which can't really be replaced. I'm also going to be replacing the contact system with this thing, which is kind of similar to the original. Basically, there used to be a plug which would connect to the tender. I had to bypass that because the wire was completely broken on the original model. So this is going to be going on there. Then I'm going to be adding this plate, which will go right there and hang on to this brush because it can't connect to anywhere else on the chassis because it's electrically isolated. I think I could probably get away with running the wire up here. Yeah, that's exactly what I did not want to see. Yeah, I'm just going to cheat a little bit here and add some CA to one side of the metal contact. And obviously, if you add too much of this, no power is going to flow through it. But if I can just block this off a little bit, I think it's going to help. Because the problem is the drive shaft is metal, so it's connected with the rest of the ground. So if this piece of metal touches that, instant short circuits occur. Hopefully it will fix this. Just added a bit of baking soda to the mix to help solidify it, so we'll try doing this again. Hopefully things will go slightly better this time. Okay, there we go. Well, I think it's looking pretty good. Let's take it over the track and see if the darn thing will even run. There have been a lot of projects on this channel, but if there's one I want to see more than any run, it's this one. I know it was working beforehand, but a lot has changed, so this is going to be interesting. Well, it all looks good. Let's give it some power. It's off to a pretty slow start there. Let's try reverse. Yeah, something's not right. Well, I've got a bit of a theory as to why this thing might not be working right. If we give it some power, see, we got current draw and it's a little bit higher than it should be, but the engine's running. It's just not going very fast. So if there is a problem mechanically with it, the current draw would be quite a bit higher. So I'm thinking, since we threw some new brushes in it, those just need to seat correctly, and that's why the motor isn't revving all that quickly. So I'm going to give it a chance here. I'm going to keep sharp eye on that current draw, make sure it doesn't go too high, but I bet if we just let this thing run a little, things will seat into place and it will start to rev up. Well, it's now made it an entire lap and nothing's burned up. It's dropped a little bit of current draw, but I think what this thing really needs to do is just rev hard so those brushes seat. So I'm gonna bring this thing over to the bench. I'll hook it up to a controller. Let's try to rev the bejesus out of it, and hopefully it will sort this problem out. Now I'll just connect some power to the motor alone and just let it rev like crazy here. Yep, same thing, it's not going quick. Now a long while later, and I've got a confession to make. I made a pretty big mistake when trying to reassemble this motor. So earlier I was talking about how I watched a video from Darth Santa Fe where he talked about replacing the brushes for better performance. So I did that, and this thing was running worse than it did before. But the mistake I made is that by ordering 2 factory brushes which were soft carbon, I was actually adding the problem which in his video he's showing how to get rid of. So what I did was I followed his video to a T, and I crafted up some graphite brushes out of some old Athearn ones I had laying around. So we're going to throw those in there, and I have a feeling we're going to see much better results. Well, lo and behold. Okay, that's like a million times better. It's revving so much faster. That's insane. So that's the upgrade I was looking for. So anyways, let's throw this thing back in the locomotive and see if things work a little bit better. And huge thanks to Darth Santa Fe for specifying what kind of brushes he was using, because honestly, I just wasn't paying close enough attention and didn't realize I was using the incorrect ones. Anyways, let's get these all back together. Okay, good. Let's take this thing back over to the track. I really hope this thing works. I have to admit, it's taken a lot more effort than I was expecting to try to get it to go, but I feel pretty good about this one. Okay, moment of truth. Yeah! That's a little more like it. It's way more lively. Current draw is a little bit high. Let's see if that works its way down. So now that this thing seems to be running half decent, I want to do a bit of a pulling capacity test, because before, when it only had the two-wheel drive, this thing could pull like 3 cars at most, and it was struggling. So I went ahead and I put together the whole Amtrak passenger car set, so we'll try to hook that up and see how it does here. No problems, look at that. Yeah, this thing's got way better pulling capacity now. It's not even pulling more current, in fact it's starting to drop, so I think those brushes are really seating in. This is just awesome. I'll just quickly check in on the slow speed here. It's down to about 4 volts right there. I think it's probably going to kick out about there. Well, I mean, it's cogging horribly, but it's not stopping. Well folks, that's going to be it for today's video. I hope you all enjoyed. I'm absolutely thrilled with how the new drivers are working out. This thing is running a lot better than it was before, and it just looks like $1,000,000 seeing it all back together. This is actually the first time in about 60 plus years this locomotive has been complete, so it's just great to see. And it really is just another example of how funny life can be sometimes. You know, my grandmother got this thing as a child back in the 50s, went on to have a family of her own. In the meantime, time was certainly not very kind on this locomotive in the sense that zinc pest destroyed it and rendered it pretty much useless. But my grandmother went on to have a daughter, who then had a son who happened to be into model trains, started a YouTube channel based around fixing this locomotive originally. The channel grew up, and through the funding, I was able to buy some parts for it, and here it is all these years later, riding the rails as a complete locomotive. It's just come full circle. I really can't wait to show her this locomotive. My grandmother's just going to be so happy to see it all back together. Anyways, I think I'll finish off the video there. Thank you all so much for watching.